You think dinner was always something to brag about? For black families in the 1970s, some meals were whispered about instead. They were the dishes that announced hardship before anyone said a word. Let's dig into 30 dinners that only poor black families knew by heart. Mayonnaise sandwiches were meals eaten in silence, when children knew better than to complain because nothing else filled the refrigerator. 2 slices of soft white bread with a thick smear of mayonnaise was dinner when the month outlasted the paycheck. There was no meat, no lettuce, no tomato, just bread and mayo, eaten at kitchen tables where mothers pretended not to notice disappointment. The sandwich was filling enough to quiet growling stomachs, and mayonnaise provided fat and calories that helped children sleep without hunger pains. Families never talked about these sandwiches outside the home because admitting to them meant admitting to poverty. Children grew up carrying the memory of that taste, soft bread, giving way to creamy richness that was never quite enough, but always better than nothing. Sugar water was the drink that filled cups when Kool-Aid ran out and milk was saved for morning cereal. Mothers stirred spoonfuls of white sugar into glasses of tap water, creating a sweet drink that cost almost nothing, but gave children something to sip with meager suppers. The sweetness hit the tongue fast, providing a quick rush that made hunger feel less sharp. In summer, sugar water was served cold with ice. In winter, it was warmed on the stove, turning it into something that felt almost like a treat. Children drank it without question, because asking for more meant drawing attention to what the household lacked. Sugar water was never discussed at school, but in kitchens across black neighborhoods, it was poured quietly into cups night after night. It was hydration with just enough sweetness to make poverty taste less bitter. Syrup. Sandwiches were the sweet solution when the pantry held nothing but bread and a bottle of Caro or pancake syrup. Children watched as mothers folded soft white bread around thick drizzles of golden syrup, creating a sticky, filling meal that satisfied cravings for both dinner and dessert. The syrup soaked into the bread, making it soft and almost cake-like, helping children pretend they were eating something special. There was no protein, no vegetables, nothing nutritious beyond calories, but it was enough to send kids to bed without hunger pains. Syrup sandwiches appeared when paychecks stretched too thin. They were eaten quickly and never mentioned outside the home. For children who grew up on them, the taste of cheap corn syrup still triggers memories of lean times when sweetness was the only comfort available. Neck bones and rice was the meal that turned discarded cuts of pork into something that could feed an entire family for days. Butchers sold neck bones, cheap because most customers walked past them, but black mothers knew the secret hidden in those bony scraps. Slow cooked for hours with onions, garlic, and bay leaves, the neck bones released rich marrow into a thick gravy that clung to every grain of rice. Children learned to work around the bones, pulling tender meat from crevices. The dish required patience and skill, transforming poverty into something that tasted like Sunday dinner. Neck bones stretched the food budget further than ground beef ever could, and leftovers tasted even better the next day. This was survival cooking at its finest, turning what others discarded into meals that filled bellies and warmed souls. Fatback and cabbage was a dish that announced lean times without anyone speaking about money. Fatback, the thick slab of pork fat, was cheap because it contained almost no meat. But when sliced and fried until crispy, then simmered with shredded cabbage, it transformed into something rich, savory, and deeply satisfying. The rendered fat coated every strand of cabbage, giving vegetables a silky texture and porky depth that made them irresistible. Families ate this with cornbread, using the bread to soak up the flavorful Potlikker at the bottom of the bowl. It was poor folks' food, but it never tasted like poverty when made by hands that knew how to coax flavor from almost nothing. Children who grew up eating fatback and cabbage carry the memory of that smoky, comforting taste long after circumstances changed. Water gravy and biscuits was the meal that appeared when milk ran out, but flour and drippings remained. Mothers would heat leftover bacon grease in a cast iron skillet, stir in flour until it browned, then add water instead of milk to create a thin but savory gravy. The gravy was poured hot over split biscuits, which soaked up every drop and turned soft on the tongue. It was bland compared to milk gravy, but for hungry children, it was a warm meal that filled the emptiness inside. Families made water gravy without shame because it kept everyone fed when resources were scarce. The dish required only pantry staples most households had on hand, making it reliable during the hardest stretches of the month. Water gravy was a lesson in making something from almost nothing, a skill passed down through generations who knew hunger. Potted meat sandwiches were a fixture of poor Black childhoods, made from those small cans of spreadable mystery meat that cost only pennies. The potted meat was salty, finely ground, and suspiciously smooth, but spread on white bread with mustard or pickle relish, it became a meal that could feed several children from a single can. Nobody asked what was in potted meat because knowing might have made it impossible to eat. Mothers kept cans stacked in the pantry for emergencies, pulling them out when the refrigerator was empty and payday was still distant. The sandwiches were eaten at school from brown paper bags hidden from classmates who might have recognized poverty. Potted meat tasted like survival, salty and metallic. Children who ate these sandwiches remember them with gratitude and something like grief for the lean years. Cornbread and buttermilk for supper required only two things most Black households had on hand. Fresh cornbread, baked golden in a cast iron skillet, was crumbled into a tall glass and covered with cold, tangy buttermilk. The combination was eaten with a spoon, each bite delivering gritty sweetness of corn and sharp sourness of fermented milk. It was dinner when nothing else was available and breakfast when morning offered nothing better. Children ate it without complaint because the taste was comforting even when circumstances were hard. The dish stretched back generations, connecting poor families to ancestors who survived on the same combination. There was no meat, no vegetables, but it filled stomachs and carried families through. Cornbread and buttermilk was poverty food that still tasted like home. Fried bologna was the poor child's steak, a thick slice of processed meat sizzled in a hot skillet until the edges curled up and turned crispy. The bologna would puff in the center, forming a dome that children loved to press down with their forks, listening to it hiss. Served between two slices of white bread with mustard or mayonnaise, it became a sandwich that felt almost like real dinner. Bologna was cheap, lasting weeks in the refrigerator, and a single package could feed a family multiple meals. The meat was salty and smoky, satisfying the craving for something substantial when real meat was too expensive. Children brought fried bologna sandwiches to school, trading them sometimes with kids whose families had even less. The smell of bologna frying still triggers memories of kitchens where mothers made miracles from scraps. Beans and rice was the backbone of poor Black survival, a combination so simple and powerful that it kept generations alive when nothing else was affordable. Dry beans, usually pinto or navy, were soaked overnight and simmered all day with a ham hock until creamy and rich. The beans were ladled over steaming white rice, creating a complete protein that poor families understood for centuries. A pot of beans cost almost nothing and could feed a family of 6 for days. Children ate beans and rice until sick of seeing it, but never went to bed hungry when the pot was on the stove. The dish carried African and Caribbean heritage into American kitchens, connecting families to ancestors who survived on the same ingredients. Beans and rice was proof that poverty could not defeat a people who knew how to feed themselves. Tomato sandwiches appeared when summer gardens produced more than families could can, turning ripe fruit into simple suppers that cost nothing. Thick slices of red tomato were laid between soft white bread, spread with mayonnaise and sprinkled with salt. The juice soaked through the bread, making it messy but satisfying on hot evenings when no one wanted to stand over a stove. Children ate these on back porches, juice dripping down their chins, grateful for something fresh when canned goods dominated the rest of the year. The tomatoes came from backyard plots or from neighbors who shared their harvest. There was no meat, nothing that required money, just bread and garden tomatoes that tasted like summer. For poor families, tomato sandwiches were proof that the earth could provide when paychecks could not. Sardines and crackers was the meal that fathers brought home when everything else had run out. Those small flat cans of oily fish cost almost nothing and sat on store shelves waiting for families who knew their value. The sardines were salty and strong, their silver bodies packed tight in mustard or oil. Spread on saltine crackers, they became a meal that provided protein when the refrigerator held nothing else. Children learned to eat sardines without complaining, because complaining meant acknowledging how little the family had. The smell lingered in kitchens long after the meal was finished. Fathers ate sardines standing at the counter, mothers packed them in lunches, and children grew up associating that salty taste with survival. Sardines and crackers was dignity in a tin can, sustenance when nothing else was available. Oatmeal for dinner was the meal no one talked about outside the house, because breakfast food at supper time meant things had gotten desperate. Mothers cooked a large pot of oats, sometimes sweetened with sugar, sometimes salted and served plain, stretching a box that cost pennies into a meal that filled every belly at the table. The oatmeal was thick and warm, sticking to ribs and helping children sleep without hunger waking them. There was no shame inside the kitchen, only practicality and quiet understanding that food was food regardless of when it appeared. Children ate their bowls without complaint, knowing better than to ask for something else. Oatmeal for dinner meant the pantry was nearly bare but not empty. It meant survival was still possible. The taste of plain oats still carries that memory for those who lived it. Pig feet were the cuts that ended up in poor black kitchens because no one else wanted them. Butchers practically gave them away, those knobby joints that looked nothing like the pork chops wealthier families enjoyed. But slow cooked for hours with vinegar, onions, and bay leaves, pig feet transformed into something tender, the meat falling away from tiny bones. The broth became rich and silky, perfect for soaking up with cornbread. Children learned to navigate the bones and cartilage, sucking the meat clean because there would be nothing else. Pig feet were eaten at kitchen tables where poverty was not discussed, but deeply understood. The dish required patience and knowledge, passed from grandmothers who remembered even harder times. Pig feet was poor folks' food elevated by hands that refused to let hardship win. Salmon croquettes turned a single can of pink salmon into dinner for an entire family through the alchemy of eggs, flour, and hot grease. The canned salmon was mashed with its bones, mixed with beaten egg and flour, then shaped into patties and fried until golden brown. The croquettes were crispy outside and soft inside, tasting faintly of the sea. Mothers made them stretch by adding more flour, creating more patties from less fish. Served with rice and canned vegetables, salmon croquettes became a complete meal that felt almost fancy compared to what the budget allowed. Children who grew up on them still remember the sound of croquettes sizzling in the skillet. The dish was proof that canned goods and creativity could produce something that tasted like love rather than desperation. Hot water cornbread was the simplest form of bread, made when even basics for regular cornbread were not available. Cornmeal was mixed with boiling water and a pinch of salt, shaped by hand into patties and fried in hot grease until crispy. There was no egg, no milk, nothing but meal, water, and fat. The result was dense and slightly gritty, with a crust that shattered between teeth. It was eaten hot, straight from the skillet, often as the only thing on the plate. Mothers made hot water cornbread when the end of the month arrived, before the next paycheck. Children ate it with whatever was available, sometimes just butter, sometimes nothing. The bread carried history, connecting poor families to ancestors who survived on the same recipe. Hot water cornbread was poverty made edible. Poke salad was the meal that came from roadsides and empty lots, gathered by hands that knew which wild plants could feed a family for free. Pokeweed grew everywhere in the South, its green leaves appearing each spring like a gift from the earth to those who had nothing else. The leaves had to be boiled multiple times to remove the toxins, drained and rinsed until safe to eat, then fried with bacon grease and onions. The result was tender greens with a slightly bitter taste that paired well with cornbread. Gathering poke was knowledge passed from mothers to daughters, teaching children how to identify the plant and prepare it safely. Eating poke salad meant knowing the land and trusting what it provided when grocery stores were out of reach. For poor Black families, this wild green was survival growing free along fence lines. Vienna sausages were the emergency protein that lived in pantries waiting for the worst days. Those small cans of soft, pale sausages packed in broth cost almost nothing and required no cooking. Children ate them cold, straight from the can, or heated in a skillet with whatever else was available. The sausages were salty and soft, with a texture some children loved and others tolerated because there was no alternative. Mothers kept cans hidden for when everything else ran out. The sausages could be stretched into a meal with crackers or bread, providing enough protein to keep small bodies going. Vienna sausages appeared in school lunches and late-night suppers, always with the understanding that asking for something better was not an option. The metallic taste of those small sausages still brings back memories of lean times. Government cheese arrived in plain cardboard boxes, distributed at community centers to families who qualified for assistance. The cheese was bright orange, processed into 5-pound blocks that could feed a household for weeks. It melted smoothly into grits, topped crackers for snacks, and made grilled cheese sandwiches that tasted better than anything store-bought. Children learned not to mention government cheese at school because it marked their families as poor. But at home, that orange block was treasure, sliced thick for sandwiches and grated into whatever needed flavor. The cheese was salty and rich, providing calcium and protein to growing bodies that might not have gotten enough otherwise. Government cheese was poverty assistance that actually tasted good, a rare gift from a system that usually offered little comfort. Fried Spam was the canned meat that poor families learned to love because it was cheap, lasted forever, and tasted like something when fried crispy. The pink block of processed pork was sliced thick and cooked until the edges caramelized golden brown. Served between bread or alongside eggs and grits, Spam became a protein source that required no refrigeration until opened. Children ate it without knowing it was considered poverty food elsewhere. To them, fried spam was just dinner, salty and satisfying, something hot on the plate when hot meals were not guaranteed. Mothers bought spam by the case when it went on sale, stacking cans as insurance against hard times. The taste of fried spam still triggers memories of kitchens where love and limitation lived side by side. It was survival with a crispy edge. Commodity peanut butter came in those large, label-free cans distributed alongside government cheese at community centers. The peanut butter was thick and grainy, separating with oil on top that had to be stirred back in before each use. It was saltier than store brands and stuck to the roof of the mouth. Children ate it on bread, on crackers, or straight from the spoon when nothing else was available. The cans were heavy and lasted for weeks, providing protein and fat to families who qualified for assistance. Mothers spread it thin to make it stretch further, scraping the sides of the can until nothing remained. Commodity peanut butter was not the fancy stuff, but it kept children fed and gave bodies the fuel they needed. The taste was survival, thick and persistent, just like the families who depended on it. Grits with butter was the meal that appeared when there was nothing else to cook, but the pantry still held a bag of ground corn. A pot of water was brought to boil, grits stirred in slowly to prevent lumps, then cooked until thick and creamy. A pat of butter melted on top, adding richness to what was otherwise plain sustenance. Salt and pepper were the only seasonings most families could afford. Children ate grits for breakfast, lunch, and dinner when times were hardest. The dish required almost no money to prepare, just water, grits, and whatever fat was on hand. It filled bellies and stuck to ribs, keeping hunger away for hours. Grits with butter was poor folks' food that never pretended to be anything else. It was honest, simple, and kept generations of Black families alive when nothing else was available. Crackling bread was cornbread made special. By the addition of pork cracklings, those crispy bits of rendered fat left over after making lard. The cracklings were stirred into cornmeal batter before baking, creating pockets of salty, crunchy pork throughout the bread. It was a way of using every part of the pig and adding protein to what would otherwise be plain starch. Children loved the surprise of biting into a crackling hidden in the bread. The texture was dense and rich, more filling than regular cornbread, and far more flavorful. Crackling bread appeared at tables where nothing was wasted and every scrap had purpose. Mothers baked it in cast iron skillets passed down through generations. The bread carried the taste of survival and resourcefulness, proving that poor families could create something delicious from what others discarded. Fried corn was the dish that stretched a few years into a meal for an entire family through the magic of bacon grease and patience. Fresh corn was cut from the cob, then scraped to release the milky liquid inside. The kernels and their juice were fried slowly in a skillet with bacon fat, salt, and pepper until the corn became tender and slightly caramelized. The dish was creamy and sweet with a richness that came from the rendered pork fat. Children ate fried corn as a main course when money was tight, scooping it up with cornbread or eating it straight from their plates. The corn came from gardens or was bought cheap when summer harvests flooded the markets. Fried corn was simple cooking that turned a vegetable into something substantial. It was poor folks' food that tasted like abundance. Commodity rice came in plain bags distributed to families on government assistance, providing the starchy base for countless meals. The rice was long grain and white, cooked in large pots that fed households for days. It stretched whatever else was available, turning a little meat or vegetables into enough food for everyone. Children ate rice with gravy, with beans, with canned vegetables, and sometimes with nothing but butter. The rice made small portions feel larger. Mothers cooked it daily because it was free and filling. The bags were heavy and lasted for weeks, stacked in pantries alongside other commodities. Rice was not exciting food, but it was survival food that kept bellies full. Commodity rice was the foundation of meals that kept poor black families going through the hardest times. Streak or lean was the cut of pork that fell between fatback and bacon, a slab of meat with thin streaks of lean running through solid fat. It was cheap because it offered little meat, but when sliced thin and fried crispy, it provided flavor and fat that stretched across multiple meals. The rendered grease was saved for cooking vegetables, making gravy, and frying cornbread. Children ate streak or lean for breakfast alongside grits, or for dinner with beans and rice. The meat was salty and smoky, satisfying the craving for pork when better cuts were out of reach. Streak or lean was poor folks' bacon, looked down upon by those who could afford real strips. But in black kitchens, it was valued for what it provided. The taste was survival, simple and salty. Mustard greens and cornbread was the meal that announced itself through smell long before it reached the table. The greens were cooked low and slow with a piece of fatback or ham hock, simmering until tender and infused with smoky pork flavor. The potlikker that remained was almost as valuable as the greens themselves, soaked up with wedges of hot cornbread. Children ate mustard greens because they were told to, learning to appreciate the slightly bitter taste that adults already loved. The greens were cheap, often grown in backyard gardens or bought in bunches at roadside stands. They provided vitamins and iron that poor families might not have gotten otherwise. Mustard greens and cornbread was a complete meal, filling and nutritious. It was poor folks' food that never apologized for what it was. Molasses bread was the sweetness that poor families could afford when sugar was too expensive. The bread was made with dark molasses stirred into the dough, creating a dense, moist loaf with deep, earthy sweetness. It was baked in cast iron pans and sliced thick, eaten plain or spread with butter when butter was available. Children loved molasses bread because it satisfied cravings for something sweet without costing what cake or cookies would. The molasses also provided iron and nutrients that refined sugar could not. Mothers baked it when the pantry was low, but spirits needed lifting. The smell filled kitchens with warmth and the promise of something almost like dessert. Molasses bread was practical and comforting, a small luxury within reach. It was proof that even the poorest families could find sweetness when they needed it most. Onion sandwiches were the meal that appeared when truly nothing else remained in the kitchen. A raw onion was sliced thick and layered between bread spread with mayonnaise or butter. The bite was sharp and strong, filling the mouth with a flavor that was more about survival than satisfaction. Children ate onion sandwiches because hunger made almost anything acceptable. The onions were cheap and kept for weeks without refrigeration. They provided something to chew on when meat and cheese were impossible. Adults ate them too, standing at kitchen counters with eyes watering. Onion sandwiches were not discussed outside the home because they marked a level of poverty that felt shameful. But inside those kitchens, they represented what families would do to keep hunger away. Onion sandwiches tasted like desperation and determination combined. Flour gravy on toast was the last resort meal, made when the pantry held nothing but flour, fat, and bread. Mothers would heat whatever grease was available, stir in flour until it browned slightly, then add water to create a thin, pale gravy. The gravy was seasoned heavily with salt and pepper to give it some flavor and poured hot over toasted bread. Children ate it in silence, understanding that this meal meant harder times than usual. There was no meat, no vegetables, nothing but starch on starch. But it was warm and it was filling, and that was enough when nothing else was possible. Flour gravy on toast was poverty stripped bare, with no pretense about what it was. It kept families alive when everything else had run out. The taste was bland, but the memory remained sharp for those who lived it.
Pork fatback and cabbage was a skillet dish that showed how even scraps of pork could bring life to vegetables. Fatback, mostly fat with little meat, rendered down in a hot pan until it sizzled, releasing flavor into the cabbage. My grandmother would slice the cabbage thin and cook it until tender, soaking up the richness from the fat. The result was savory, smoky, and filling, even though it was made from ingredients most considered cheap or undesirable. Families paired it with cornbread or rice, stretching it further into a full supper. It was food that came from thrift, but it carried a taste that lingered long after the plates were cleared. Hot water cornbread with beans was a meal made from ingenuity and routine. When the oven was too expensive to use and flour too hard to find, folks made do on the stovetop. Cornmeal, boiling water, and salt were all it took to fry golden rounds that sizzled crisp around the edges. Served beside a pot of seasoned beans, it became dinner good enough to forget hard times for a little while. It was soft inside, crunchy outside, and perfect for soaking up every drop of bean broth. That combination filled stomachs and lifted spirits, proof that poverty never stood a chance against a skilled cook with a hot pan. The sound of the cornbread frying was like music, sharp, rhythmic, and alive. Children watched as their mothers flipped each piece, timing it by instinct. Sometimes a little sugar was added, sometimes a sprinkle of pepper, but the result was always the same. Simple joy on a plate. Even when cupboards looked bare, a bag of cornmeal could turn a kitchen into a place of plenty. It was survival disguised as comfort, the kind of meal that told the world that love could still taste golden and crisp. Cabbage and sausage pot dinners were beloved because cabbage was cheap, filling, and strong enough to stand up to long cooking. Mothers sliced the cabbage thinly, added onions, potatoes, and just a few coins worth of cured sausage. As it cooked, the sausage flavored the whole pot, giving every bite that smoky richness even though the meat itself was scarce. Sometimes mothers added pepper flakes or vinegar to brighten the pot, and the whole mixture softened into something soothing and hearty. Children felt like they were eating something rich and comforting, even though most of the volume came from vegetables. The pot simmered slowly, filling the kitchen with steam and warmth during cold evenings. Kids felt lucky whenever this meal appeared because it tasted like more than the ingredients suggested. Cabbage and sausage pot dinners were winter survival disguised as comfort food. Fish sticks and crinkle-cut fries were the kind of dinner kids begged for, the unofficial meal of busy weeknights when the adults were too tired to fuss. The moment that frozen box hit the counter, excitement followed, because everyone knew dinner would be fast and crispy, and exactly the kind of food children believed counted as a celebration. The fish sticks went into the oven in neat rows, sizzling as the breading crisped while the fries baked beside them, each crinkle catching just enough salt to make them addictive. It was not fancy seafood, not even close, but to a child it tasted like the best thing the freezer aisle had ever made. There was comfort in the uniformity, the predictability, the way dipping sauces always turned the plate into a tiny adventure. Adults liked it because it filled everyone up without much effort. Kids loved it because it tasted like freedom and fun. Even now, biting into a fish stick can take you straight back to a living room floor covered in toys, a television playing too loudly, and a plate balanced on your knees. It was cheap, easy, and unforgettable. Deviled eggs made with extra mayonnaise and pickle juice stretched expensive eggs into appetizers that fed crowds while adding protein to meals that sometimes lacked adequate meat. Black mothers would hard-boil dozens of eggs when they went on sale, carefully peeling them and mixing the yolks with mayonnaise, mustard, pickle juice, and paprika until smooth and tangy. The pickle juice was key, adding flavor dimension while helping the filling stay moist and spreadable without requiring extra mayonnaise. Each egg half became a small, protein-rich bite that satisfied hunger while looking festive and deliberate on serving platters. Children loved deviled eggs because they were handheld and mild, while adults appreciated their versatility as appetizer, side dish, or even light main course when other food ran short. A dozen eggs could be transformed into 24 servings, making them remarkably economical for their protein content. The eggs could be prepared the day before Thanksgiving. Sautéed chicken livers with peppers were a deeply flavored dish made from one of the cheapest proteins available. Chicken livers cooked quickly, absorbing the flavor of onions and bell peppers sautéed in a little grease. The mixture became rich, savory, and slightly sweet from the vegetables. Mothers served it over rice or with bread to balance the intensity of the liver. Kids learned to appreciate the dish over time, especially once they tasted how tender the livers became when cooked right. It was a meal that proved inexpensive ingredients could carry real depth. Mothers relied on this dish often during tight weeks because the livers provided iron and protein without straining the budget. The peppers added color and brightness, making the plate feel more generous. Even those who were unsure at first found themselves reaching for seconds once they understood the warmth behind the flavor. Sautéed chicken livers with peppers were a staple of kitchens that knew how to coax flavor from anything. Stewed okra with cornmeal dumplings was a dish that blended frugality with comfort in a way that stuck with families for decades. Okra, often grown in backyard gardens, went into a simmering pot with onions, tomatoes, and broth until it softened into a thick stew. My grandmother would mix simple cornmeal batter, drop spoonfuls into the bubbling pot, and let the dumplings cook until they puffed into tender bites. The texture of the okra thickened the stew naturally, giving it body without needing flour or cream. Each bowl carried the flavor of the garden, earthy and sustaining, with dumplings that filled the stomachs of tired workers. It was food that came straight from the soil and stretched further than its ingredients suggested. Children grew up eating this dish as a matter of routine, yet it became part of the rhythm of survival. In the 1960s, stewed okra with cornmeal dumplings was a staple that represented both thrift and ingenuity, turning humble vegetables and flour into something worthy of pride at the dinner table. Okra and tomato stirrup was one of those dishes that started as a side and ended up stealing the whole show. Fresh or canned tomatoes met sliced okra in a single skillet, cooking down together until they became soft, sticky, and full of flavor. The texture was thick and rich, the kind that clung to every spoonful of rice or cornbread. The smell was tangy and green, sharp at first, but mellowing into something soothing. It was food that reminded families of southern summers and hard work in the fields. Even those who swore they did not like okra found themselves asking for seconds. The trick was to cook it slow, letting the tomatoes do their work until everything melted together into a perfect mess of goodness. A bit of onion or bell pepper made it shine, and sometimes a pinch of sugar brought out the sweetness. In neighborhoods where fresh produce was scarce, a can of tomatoes and a bag of frozen okra could still taste like a garden feast. It was humble food, yes, but it had heart, and every stir of the spoon carried the sound of love being cooked into survival. Hot dogs and pork and beans were the kind of quick dinner families relied on when nights were too busy for anything else. The beans simmered until they thickened, turning sweet and smoky, while sliced hot dogs added enough salt and substance to make the whole meal feel complete. It was simple, cheap, and surprisingly satisfying, the kind of dinner kids hurried toward when they heard the can opener turning. It tasted like television nights, homework half done, and the comfortable chaos of family life. Even now, people crave it because it brings back a feeling of uncomplicated joy. The flavor was familiar and predictable in the best way. A warm little bowl that asked nothing of you except to sit down and enjoy it. Parents liked that it came together in minutes, and kids liked that it felt like a treat, even though it was one of the easiest meals in the house. It was a dish woven into weeknights, routines, and the small moments that ended long days with something warm and steady. Black-eyed peas and stewed tomatoes were an inexpensive pairing that offered both protein and comfort. The peas were simmered first, softening in a pot of water with onions or a scrap of fat for extra flavor. As they cooked, the broth turned creamy and earthy, creating a base that tasted rich even without meat. Stewed tomatoes were added near the end, bringing acidity and sweetness that balanced the earthiness of the peas. Mothers often seasoned it with pepper or garlic powder to deepen the flavor. The mixture was spooned over rice or eaten with cornbread, filling the stomach in a way that felt grounding and complete. Kids liked the bright color and the mild, comforting taste. The dish was warm, reliable, and deeply nourishing. It was a simple meal, but never a disappointing one. Black-eyed peas and stewed tomatoes were survival food with soul. Pound cake baked with margarine instead of butter became the golden, dense dessert that could be sliced thin to feed many people from a single loaf. Black mothers would cream margarine with sugar and eggs, adding flour gradually to create batter that baked into cake with tight crumb and rich flavor despite lacking expensive butter. The cake lasted for days when wrapped properly, actually improving in texture as it sat. A single pound cake could yield 24 thin slices when cut carefully, making it remarkably economical for providing dessert for large gatherings. Some women glazed their cakes with simple sugar icing, while others served them plain or with berries when fruit was affordable. Children loved pound cake because it was sweet without being overwhelming, while adults appreciated its versatility. Pound cake proved that basic ingredients could create impressive results. Chicken wing stew was one of those meals that would surprise modern ears, since wings were once the cheapest part of the bird. My grandmother bought them in bulk when she could, piling them into pots with onions, celery, and carrots. Slowly simmered, the wings gave up their fat and flavor, turning thin broth into rich gravy. She thickened it with flour or cornstarch, serving it hot over rice or bread to stretch it even further. It was messy eating, but no one complained because the taste was so comforting. Wings may be prized today, but in the 1960s they were scraps, turned into nourishment by clever hands. She said every part of the bird had value if you treated it with respect. Chicken wing stew carried the spirit of thrift, transforming what others dismissed into something that filled the house with warmth. It was proof that good cooking did not depend on wealth, only patience and care. Canned sardines with crackers and mustard were the no-cook meal that kept hunger away when the stove stayed cold. It was the supper of night shifts, factory breaks, and long days that never seemed to end. You peeled back the tin, spread the fish on saltines, added a dab of mustard, and called it dinner. It was sharp, salty, and strangely comforting. People who ate this did not care about appearances. They cared about surviving another day. The tang of mustard, the crunch of crackers, the oil of the sardines, it all came together in quiet satisfaction. It was the food of those who refused to quit. In a world that gave them little, they made do with what they had and made it taste like perseverance. Black-eyed peas cooked with onions and bacon fat carried both flavor and cultural significance, representing good fortune traditions that connected families to their southern roots and African heritage. Black mothers prepared black-eyed peas for Thanksgiving as practice for New Year's Day when they'd serve them for luck, creating consistency in holiday cooking that children recognized and anticipated. The peas themselves cost less than beans, making them even more economical, and they cooked faster while still providing complete protein when served alongside cornbread or rice. Bacon fat, saved throughout the year, seasoned the peas with smoky richness, while onions added sweetness and depth that made even simple preparations taste complex. Some families added tomatoes or peppers when available, but the core remained peas, onions, and pork fat, simmered until tender. Children grew up associating black-eyed peas with celebration and family, understanding that these humble legumes carried meaning beyond mere nutrition. Cabbage and smoked sausage skillet was one of those frugal dinners that surprised people with how flavorful it was. Cabbage wilted down into soft, sweet ribbons while smoked sausage browned and released enough richness to season the whole pan together. They created a dish that was savory, smoky, and unexpectedly comforting. It filled the kitchen with steam and scent, warming the room as much as the meal warmed the stomach. Families made it because it was cheap, filling, and impossible to mess up. Kids might wrinkle their noses at the cabbage, but one bite usually changed their minds. Even now, that combination of smoky sausage and tender cabbage pulls people right back to their childhood kitchens, to nights when dinner was simple but perfect. And there was something deeply grounding about the way it all came together in one skillet, as if the ingredients knew how to support each other without much help. The dish tasted like a quiet evening, like soft conversations drifting across a small kitchen table, like the kind of comfort that comes from meals built on tradition and resourcefulness.
Which of these dinners do you remember from your childhood? Drop your memories in the comments, hit like, and subscribe so we can keep honoring the meals that kept Black families fed through the hardest times.